tell me where the Ambassador Hotel is? I thought it was on this block, and I don't recognize it.
I don't know what it is that's fascinating about music, but evidently I am fascinated by it. I always have been fascinated by sound as a little child. That's one of the first memories I have of crawling behind the piano when I was a little tiny tot and they couldn't find me, mainly because I was interested in where the sound was coming from, I think. But I'm interested in sound, generally, and being interested in sound makes me want to design sounds. I'm a sound designer.
Evan Tonsing, composer and member of Oklahoma State University's music faculty. I'm Jeremy Haladyna. Welcome to Stillwater Ripples. Today and Thursday we feature a portrait of this Stillwater artist, a portrait incorporating both his creative philosophy and some of his music. As for the frogs you're hearing, don't worry too much about them. They'll make a whole lot more sense as we go along. Evan Tonsing has chosen a uniquely private creative existence which he pursues with great intensity in the country outside Glencoe. As our discussion begins, I wonder aloud how Evan's isolation might be affecting the people he is trying to communicate with. Are you finding that this may be drawing you from your audience in the sense that they're in the culture of bombardment constantly, whereas you're making every effort to detach yourself from that?
I imagine...
Or are you filling a void that may exist in their own life?
Well, Jeremy, it all comes about the role that I'm trying to play. Essentially, I am basically a hermit, and that is someone that is very happy seeing people very rarely. But I'm a hermit that's living a very public life with a lot of contact of people. How I handle that is every person I deal with, all the students, all the faculty, I try to treat them like friends. And then it's no difficulty. But essentially, I am a hermit. I'm a very shy person.
Well, all composers are hermits these days.
They are? I didn't know that.
I've seen that practically in print, I think.
I wouldn't doubt that.
If not that cut and dried, I've certainly seen a lot of things that would suggest that composers are maybe the loneliest guys in town, not the Maytag repairman.
But you see, I'm not lonely out there because I have so many things that are vitally interesting to me to work on. I had a friend that was concerned about my living out alone, and she asked, "Don't you get lonely?" And I had to think about that because I always think about things Beth asked me. And I thought, no, I really don't recall the last time I felt lonely. Sometimes I wish projects were over and I could go out and play, or I could go visit someone, but if the project's not over, I don't allow myself that. So, no, I don't really feel lonely out there, and you're right. The basic problem would be that there would be a gap between me and my fellow audience, because they're not living that lifestyle. I don't know. I'll have to keep an eye on that, though.
Have your philosophical bases and maybe even your way of writing, has that all changed since the first pieces on this Sunday program were written?
Yes.
This is a program really covering a lot of time.
1962 to 1984. That's a lot of time. And yes, the philosophies have changed drastically, but my lifestyle has changed very drastically. The first piece was written when I was a senior. The first piece on this program was written when I was a senior in college. And, you know, I keep seeing in our students now that when they graduate, it's as though the world is their cookie. And there's certainly kind of open-minded optimism. I'm going to go out and conquer the world. And it's wonderful to be around, having had that feeling and now weathered many storms. I'm not so sure I can share that feeling, but that sort of feeling was there at the beginning.
This was at the University of Kansas.
That was the University of Kansas. Then when I got to Amarillo, it was very much immersion, because the number of programs we performed, it was just astounding. It was not uncommon to have 3 major programs, completely different programs a week, every week for maybe 8 or 9 weeks, and then a rest a little bit. It was just a scramble. I was doing so much there, and there was so much music going all the time. Musically, it was very exciting, and I grew a lot from that. But now I'm in a different situation, and so I think the pieces here are a little bit more real.
We have a transcription on the program from those Amarillo years that would have been written for the symphony.
It was written for the symphony.
Did it get performed?
It was performed once. It qualifies only as a first performance in that the 2-piano version which I made has never been played. The first time I heard it was when Karen Carter and I first read it through. And it works as piano music. The first piece of the ones we play is actually a reminiscence of how my grandmother told stories. When I was very small, my grandmother told stories that every sentence didn't really end, it led on to the next sentence. She had a way of grabbing my attention. And so the first piece of those 3 does that. And I don't know. In some ways, there are reminiscences about it. For the last 2 movements, though, they are definitely private reminiscences, not public reminiscences, so there's no program with it.
Many of these pieces on the Sunday program were written in response to a certain need at the time. Mm-hmm. And I find that to be a common thread in the works of yours. I know in some cases it's a literary stimulus that seems to have moved you on, either poems that someone has submitted to you or a theatrical production of the moment. Do you feel yourself that you're particularly good at setting literary texts?
I think my real skill was actually being able to respond to unusual demands. A person contacted me on the East Coast and said, I make flutes, bamboo flutes. They're only capable of a major scale, and they play 2 octaves, 15 notes. Can you write music for that? And somehow I wrote lots of music for that. And the reason that happened was personal growth. But yeah, in response to your real question, there were 2 questions in that, I think. And the question is, quite a bit of music is in response to people. I think for me the essential art is storytelling. I don't tell necessarily stories with ideas, but in some ways music is like rhetoric without words. Music is like sentences, but without words. Music is spinning on of an idea and following where the idea, wherever it goes. It might go in an unusual place, you follow it, but there eventually comes a time when the sentence ends. In some ways, music's that melody's that way. I like following a melody. Just like I like listening to an interesting person that's going someplace I don't expect when they're talking. And it's interesting to see where they go. The first piece on the program is a setting of a Shakespeare sonnet, which I made as a greeting card to friends to say thanks. Your positive warmth has made a difference in my life.
Let's talk about Mr. Green's birthday album, which is another case of you doing something maybe just for the heck of doing it, but also for a certain individual, under certain circumstances. It would be a neat thing to do, I think, for a small child, so that as that child grew up, he would have maybe more sophisticated musical greetings every year. But
here's what happened. When you write music and you perform a lot, you have friends that really enjoy that musical aspect of who you are. And Corky has been a good friend. He's sometimes a very, very strict critic about some things that he hears. And he's been, in some ways, a sort of a fan, as I'm a fan of some of the things he does. And his birthday came up, and I thought of a birthday gift, and the birthday gift was to give him an album with one piece for every one of his birthdays, and every year add one. In some ways, however, it is a statement to him that I expect our friendship will last a long time. And it was a neat idea, but it has become, in some ways, a way for me to find a niche for all those pieces that are light music, all those pieces that are for fun.
One of the pieces on Sunday afternoon's program involves a natural setting, which you captured via tape recording, and which is then integrated with a live performance. How many like things have you done in the past?
Well, in 1975, I started working with tape, and at that time I was living in Stillwater, and so there wasn't much I could do with nature. And I was interested in perhaps using some piece of nature as a background to a piece. And Esther Wolfram, bless her heart, said, even when I first arrived, "Evan, you've got to meet Dale McKinney." And so she introduced me to Dale McKinney, and it wasn't until 1975 that I met him, and he played some tapes for me that just blew me away. And when I moved out to the country north of Glencoe, I now have many, many, many nature recordings, because almost every time I put the microphone out the window or on the front porch, it's a completely different sound. It's amazing out in the country, because every time I look out the window, because of the light, it's a different show. The light changes that entire window. So it's like I have a new painting outside of every window all the time. And the same with nature. I am now experienced enough to almost recognize the season by the sounds, because it changes violently from month to month. And so this is part of that piece is a part of an ongoing thing of incorporating nature and human sounds. But that in itself is a goal which was given me by Dale McKinney. Frogs form an accompaniment to the flute, but it's sort of not fair, because in this one the frogs are definitely background. They're not the main material.
Excerpt from Nocturne After a Spring Rain for Flute and Tape, composed 1984 by Evan Tonsing, interpreted by faculty flutist Gwen Powell, with accompanying frogs. Join us again Thursday at 12:30 for another up-close visit with Evan Tonsing. Stillwater Ripples is produced for KOSU by Jeremy Haladyna and Paula Price.
I'm not burned out, and as a matter of fact, I feel like a little kid just on the beginning of an amazing adventure.
That's Evan Tonsing, composer and member of Oklahoma State University's music faculty. I'm Jeremy Haladyna. Welcome to Stillwater Ripples and our second sound portrait of this individualistic creative artist. Nature has inspired Evan, and so has literature in its many forms. But that implies that inspiration flows ceaselessly. Today at the outset, I ask what happens when the dry words on a page do not tickle a composer's fancy. Have you ever had to set a text that you were not in sympathy with?
Very, very definitely.
And what happens?
Well, what happens is a trick. And the trick is displacement of person. What I do is I imagine a character that is not me.
Doing the writing.
Saying those lines.
Oh,
and I am notating what that character does. It's not me. You can play a part of somebody you're not. It's a mental trick. But yes, I have to play that mental trick or I can't do it. But yes.
I don't imagine that was the case with the poems Marian Abbott suggested for your waltz songs, though.
No, she has excellent taste. And what a wonderful sense of humor. Marian has a great deal of showmanship in her musicianship, and she chose poems that are perfect. The poems by Parker were just wonderful. I loved them, and I loved. They remind me of Marian. They remind me of Marian. Let's hear it for Women's Lib, folks. So that's your thing.
You have, if I can say so, a real gift for setting poems in a light vein.
I hadn't thought of that.
In the sense of a Lear verse or a Dorothy Parker verse. Do you have that same sense that things just go right under those kinds of circumstances?
I'm around myself all the time. I very rarely am not around me. And the impression I get of me is much more serious than other people get. Much less joyous. I remember a relative that used to live out in the country, and when we'd visit her, she'd get so excited. And in some ways, it was like a small dog barking when he's been alone in the house and suddenly humans come back. Just an enormous amount of excitement. I think because I spend so much time alone, when I actually am around people, I get very keyed up. And maybe that's how I come across the people as much more energetic. When I'm by myself, my specific gravity is lower. I'm more down, more calm. When I write, things are almost slow motion. I was taught to write very deliberately, and I do. I have timed a few pieces how long it took me to write. It's about 15 minutes a note.
Well, that doesn't really signify, does it? It's the end result. But really, judging from some of these rapid movements in the waltz songs, for instance, one would not think that much time had been invested in each passage or run or note, and perhaps it wasn't. But my point is that it looks as though the inspiration was spontaneous, which is what you would be aiming for, it seems to me.
The initial thing when you notate a melody is spontaneous. The way I was taught to write melodies was dots. What you first write is a space sort of thing. You hear a tune in your head, and exactly as you hear the tune, you put dots in sort of a general direction of where the dots went. You don't try and write it. And then while those dots keep what you heard fresh in your brain, you then go back and get the rest of the notation. So yes, initially, for a melody, it's very spontaneous. But But it's not so spontaneous because immediately the process of critically examining that begins, and I already start editing. Oh, no, it can't be that. I change that. Or, no, not that note again. You can't hit a high point 4 times in a row and expect it to have any juice in it.
In doing that, are you your own best critic, or do you feel any compunction to match the result up with any kind of academic priority that might have been set somewhere in your distant past? Do this, don't do this.
I am a theory teacher, and one might think that affects writing, but theory is so different than composition. Composition is...
Then why have we been conning these people, all these young people, all these years?
It's not a con. We're not teaching them to be writers. We're teaching them to be qualified professional musicians that can look at a page and see a D major chord and play a D major chord, and not look at a page and say, well, there's D, there's F sharp, there's A. It's not that. Professionals have to look at a page and understand the sense of it. And I think it's more for the performer, the conductor, the sort of person that isn't a creator, that isn't a creator in the sense of making music up from nothing. That's what that's done from. But creativity is in a completely different thing, as you well know. Creativity is almost a linkage of the conscious and the unconscious. My unconscious brain does quite a bit of the writing, and sometimes I do Stravinsky's trick. I don't play cards, but I do play one game of cards. It's a very vicious type of solitaire in which you have to keep your conscious brain full of all sorts of memory things. Like you have 4 columns, you lay the cards out in various ways, and you have to remember what's in every of the 4 discard piles and all that stuff. It keeps your conscious brain so busy that your unconscious brain can go about its business and solve things. So when I come to what I call one of those dead ends in a piece where the piece has gone someplace and it's the wrong place, it's just horrible, and I can't seem to get a way out of it, I play that particular game of solitaire, and usually, or I take a nap, or I go out for a walk, or I clean house. Clean house is great. And after I do one of those things where my brain isn't on that, my unconscious has had enough slack, it can solve the problem. Or if it's really bad, I can go to sleep, and the next morning I wake up, the problem is solved. But it's intuition. But the wonderful thing is, Jeremy, I can then take my theoretical apparatus and apply it to what I've found intuitively. And it's simple. When I have a sketch, the first thing I start doing is trying to discover what animal that belongs to. Wait, that's part of a shoulder blade of ape, or of an armadillo or something. And if the piece is an ape or an armadillo, the whole thing is implied by that. It's very organic.
I'm led to wonder whether composers today who are always bemoaning their fate, and maybe it's just some of it, but are they the victims of convention, or are they their own worst enemy in trying to straddle these conventions, these musical conventions, and to please the concert hall audience when maybe they should be doing something else?
Oh, Jeremy, I think we're living in a golden age. Proof of that is the number of composers. I have heard it said, I think by Mockless, that today there are more composers alive than have ever existed. That you could take all the composers of the past and add them up, and there are more composers alive today than in all of the past. Now, any composer can hear any kind of music from any part of the world written anytime. I mean, we should be turning out the world's greatest music. I think it's too soon, but I think we're going to see from this generation or from this century of composers a high quality of product never before capable. The world was never capable of it.
Well, let me say this. I share your enthusiasm and for writing, but who cares? And is anybody listening? That's my point.
Well, to me, I have played gigs. I'm a cellist and sometimes a toy pianist, and even more rarely a pianist that goes around and plays gigs. And I have played for large amounts of people. Once in Amarillo, I think I experienced the terror of playing for, I guess it was around 2,000 people. and that is terrifying. But I've also played gigs where there were 3 people present. The musical value to me when there are even 3 people present can be great. I enjoy playing even for small groups. If there's one person that gets off on the music, I consider it effort well spent. And so if there's one person in the audience that's going to enjoy it, that's all I care about.
I suppose I'm spoiled by the business of mass audiences and reaching the biggest amount of audience share and all of this, but maybe too, I think I just want as many people as possible to turn out Sunday afternoon, because I think that the more people that share that experience, the better. And if people don't know about that experience or aren't moved to try that experience, which is the experience of confronting something new and never before heard, I think the world will be much the poorer for it.
I'm reminded of my dog, a dead dog named Pandy, and she was, alas, affected by a disease which made her, truthfully, a pretty low IQ dog. But she had one advantage. Every morning when she woke up, she was sort of neat to watch because it was a totally new world. She rediscovered sunlight. She rediscovered furniture. She rediscovered the rug. She rediscovered us. You see her tail wagging with recognition when she saw this and that as she got up in the morning. I envy her a little bit. I don't know.
Evan Tonsing, our guest today on Stillwater Ripples. Evan's art will have the last word today, only that's not entirely accurate. Should I perhaps say that Evan's friend, collaborator, will have the last chirp? That too would be misleading, so let me turn things over to Evan Tonsing. He'll explain.
I had taped some birds that were on my front porch, and some company came. And for some reason or other, I was very flustered, and I wanted to play them as tape, so I pushed what I thought was the on button. Instead, I pushed the button, which changed the speed to half speed, and then, without rectifying that, I immediately turned it on, and that was the first time I heard the bird at half speed. And suddenly I heard much more detail. So as soon as the company left, I did a trick called yo-yoing. I took another tape recorder and I had it play at half speed. So what I'd recorded at full speed, I put it on the half speed machine, then recorded that on full speed and put the one I just recorded from that on half speed, kept bringing down the tempo until I was flabbergasted, because at each tempo there was more. And furthermore, it proved to me how accurate the birds are. I had heard the theory that birds actually yodel, which is every pitch consists of many pitches in the overtone series, and yodeling would be oscillating from some related pitches in the overtone series back and forth, which is not too hard to do. These birds, these barn swallows, did not do that. They were singing absolute pitches at an incredibly quick tempo, very accurately in tuning, and it could not be done by yodeling. They weren't taking one pitch and breaking it down the way a prism breaks light down into various colors. They weren't doing that. They were singing separate pitches. And that, to me, meant that the birds actually think faster than we do, that they hear faster than we do, that they live faster than we do.
Their heart rate would certainly bear that out.
Yes, very, very rapid. I wonder if speed of perception is a factor in difference amongst the various kinds of life forms on our planet. From my viewpoint, I'm beginning to think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Here are 2 lines from William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, etched around 1793. How do you know, but every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight, closed by your senses 5. A recent visitor was kind enough to tape record a response. Here it is. If you didn't quite catch all of that, here it is again, but twice as slowly. If you didn't quite catch all of that, here it is again, but twice as slowly. If you didn't quite catch all of that, here it is again, but twice as slowly. If you didn't quite catch all of that, here it is again, but twice as slowly.
Didn't quite catch all of that, play it again, twice as slowly.